Hello again. Happy Friday to everybody. Absolutely did not realize it was Friday. Uh, Thank you to being off all summer um, and actually having to do a little bit of work for school this last week. I absolutely thought it was Thursday, so mea culpa on my lateness. So let's talk about the Baptists. When we think of early American history, a lot of what we think about for the colonies in the North anyway, in the New England colonies, we think about the Puritans and the influence the Puritans had on society there. Many of us don't associate the Baptists with having become the force that they did, especially as we drove toward the pre-revolution, revolutionary era. And what always drew me to the Baptists was the influence they had on the Revolutionary era thinkers, particularly their doctrines of the separation of church and state. When we think about the Puritans, we remember the Puritans were perfectly willing to accept someone back in who had issues with Puritan theology. What they weren't so willing to do was accept someone that outright rejected the Puritan beliefs. The Quakers, the Baptists, or honestly, anyone that wasn't Puritan. If you weren't Puritan, you were absolutely wrong. What the Baptists brought was the idea that the church and the state should not be intertwined. It wasn't to say that they still didn't have plenty of laws that were based on theology. I mean, when you look at the charter for Rhode Island, Rhode Island outlawed witchcraft. They outlawed sodomy. They outlawed adultery based on religious beliefs. Uh, but they weren't so willing to reject people who had other faiths outside of the Baptist faith. Um, Passing these laws and operating outside of a strict church state uh, I guess the best way to put it was working hand in hand. Um, the Puritans outlawed both Baptist and Quakers, leading to the hanging of the four Quakers in Massachusetts, which we've talked about earlier in the class. And in Revolutionary Virginia, Isaac pointed to the rise of the Baptist Church in Virginia and their emphasis on evangelicalism and social life. There was a contrast between the austerity of some Baptists and the opulence of the Anglican planters, and their church discipline was taken as radicalism, even though it wasn't. And so the struggle for religious toleration there played out during the Revolution as the Baptists continued to work to disestablish the Anglican faith. Kroll Smith, in one passage that he wrote, suggests the strength of the evangelical movement determined its ability to mobilize power outside of conventional authority structure. And that comes back to the separation of church and state. If we had maintained a Puritan structure, the church and the state would have worked to strengthen the power the church had on the state, whereas due to the Baptist influence, and among others, um, the church was working alongside but not interfering with the power of the state. So we still had laws that were being passed based on religious belief, but those laws weren't the be-all, end-all they would have been for the Puritan faith. This week's very quick. Usually I would go very much longer. We're in the process of trying to get our sophomore back to University of Colorado while we're also trying to figure out what online learning looks like for Texas, where we reside. So it's interesting times. I hope everyone is staying safe and have a great weekend.